Flames devour 40 years of dreams as John Mason watches his wheat fields burn. The outlaws think they're dealing with a helpless old farmer, too stubborn to sell his land. They don't know his son. John Jr. isn't just another soldier coming home. He's the deadliest combat tactician in Delta Force history. For 15 years, he's led classified missions that transformed Third World warlords into cautionary tales. His callsign was Harvester, because he always collected what was due. Tonight, as fire consumes the last of his father's crop, a different kind of harvest begins. The outlaws who burned these fields don't realize they've just sown the seeds of their own destruction. In 5 days, they'll learn why some soldiers' skills only sharpen with age, and why you never threaten a warrior's family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. John Mason Sr. walked the scorched perimeter of his wheat field at dawn, boots crunching on burned stalks that should have been ready for harvest in 2 weeks. 40 years of working this land had taught him every inch of its personality. How? The south field caught the morning sun just right, how the western acres needed extra attention during dry spells. Now it all lay in ruins. The Thompson Creek Valley had been good to the Masons. When other farms failed during the drought of '95, his field stayed green. When grain prices dropped in a 2008, his careful crop rotation and soil management kept him afloat. The land provided as long as you respected it. That's what he'd tried to teach John Jr. before the boy traded dirt for desert camo. Whole counties, changing, John. Sheriff Peters had warned him last month. These developers, they're not like the land speculators we used to deal with. They don't take no for an answer. John Sr. had dismissed the warning. He'd faced down bank foreclosures and corporate buyouts before. But watching smoke rise from his ruined crops, he had to admit this felt different. More personal, more dangerous. Inside, his farmhouse kitchen, the morning sun caught a framed photo on the wall, John Jr. in his dress uniform, receiving some medal, the details of which were still classified. Pride and worry warred in John Sr.'s chest whenever he looked at that picture. His son had become something he didn't fully understand. The quiet farm boy who used to help him fix tractors now led missions that never made the news. Their last conversation 6 months ago still haunted him. "The farm won't last forever, Dad," John Jr. had said. "These big agricultural corporations, they're squeezing out family farms all over the country." "This land's been Mason ground for 3 generations, he'd snapped back. "I'm not selling out to become another corporate statistic." The argument had ended badly, as they usually did these days. Too much distance, too many years of diverging paths. His son fought wars in foreign lands while he fought his own battles here, against drought, against market prices, against progress. A truck engine rumbled in the distance. Through his kitchen window, John Sr. watched Brad Cooper's pickup roll down the dirt road toward his house. Brad's family had farmed the neighboring property for as long as the Masons had been here. But last month, Brad had sold out to the development consortium. 30 years of friendship hadn't survived the lure of retirement money. "They'll come at night again," Brad called out as he approached the house. "You should take the offer, John. These people, they're not playing by old rules." John Sr. felt the weight of his father's shotgun beneath the kitchen counter. "Neither am I," he replied quietly, though Brad was too far away to hear. Inside his desk drawer lay the developer's latest offer. $5 million for the farm, well above market value. Next to it sat a stack of increasingly threatening letters, culminating in last night's fire. They thought they could intimidate an old farmer into submission. Maybe they were right. His weathered fingers traced the edge of his phone, hesitating over his son's number. Pride warred with practicality. John Jr. had his own life now, his own battles, but as another tendril of smoke rose from his burning fields, John Sr. realized some fights were too big to face alone. Before he could change his mind, he dialed. The phone rang 3 times before his son's voice answered, tight with professional control. "Dad, what's wrong?" For a moment, John Sr. couldn't speak. How do you tell your son that everything you'd disagreed about was coming true, that the world he'd tried so hard to preserve was burning down around him? "They're burning the wheat fields," he said finally. I think I need your help, son." The silence that followed felt longer than the years that had grown between them. The signs had been there for months, John Sr. realized as he sorted through his damaged equipment in the barn. First, it was small things: cut fences, damaged irrigation pipes, equipment that mysteriously malfunctioned. The kind of troubles any farmer might face if you didn't look too closely at the patterns. Sheriff Peters had written off the first few incidents as random vandalism. "Probably just kids," he'd said, not meeting John's eyes. "You know how it gets when the high school lets out for summer." But it wasn't summer anymore, and these weren't kids' pranks. Last week they'd poisoned his south well. The week before that, someone had tampered with his tractor's brake lines. Each incident precisely targeted, each one professionally executed. The message was clear: accidents could happen to stubborn old farmers. "Your boy still playing soldier?" Frank Miller asked from the barn doorway, making John Sr. jump. He hadn't heard the bank manager approach. Frank had that way about him lately, showing up unannounced, always with the same conversation in mind. "Serving his country," John corrected, wiping grease from his hands. "Not playing anything," Frank nodded, feigning sympathy. "Shame he's not. I'm here to help, especially now." He looked pointedly at the burned fields visible through the barn door. "That's what, 3rd fire this month?" "4th, John said quietly. "Each one closer to the house, each one more destructive. Insurance won't cover much more of this." Frank pulled out a familiar-looking envelope. "Offer's still good, John. Actually went up after last night. 7 million now, clean sale, no complications." John Sr. studied his old friend's face. They'd gone to high school together, stood at each other's weddings. Now Frank couldn't quite meet his eyes as he delivered thinly veiled threats. "No complications." Meaning, what exactly, Frank? Meaning some accidents are preventable. Frank set the envelope on a workbench. "Valley's changing, John. Big money coming in. New resort, golf course, luxury homes, progress." "Progress," John spat the word. "Is that what you call burning a man's livelihood?" Frank's face hardened. "I call it reality. Thompson Creek Valley's prime real estate now. You're sitting on gold. John, only question is whether you'll profit from it or—" He left the threat hanging. After Frank left, John Sr. found himself staring at the old rifle rack in his office. His own hunting rifles were there, gathering dust, but the empty space in the middle caught his eye, where John Jr.'s first .22 used to hang. His son had taken it when he enlisted, a piece of home to carry with him. The phone rang, startling him from his memories. It was Brad Cooper again. "They're calling a town meeting tonight," Brad said without preamble. "Voting on some new zoning ordinances. You should come, John. Show people you're still reasonable." "Reasonable," John repeated. The word tasted bitter. "Like you were reasonable when you sold out." "I was practical," Brad snapped. "Got my family out before things got ugly. You've got no one left to protect, John. No reason to be stubborn." But that wasn't quite true. He had his son, and maybe, just maybe, he still had his pride. That evening, John Sr. stood in his kitchen watching headlights stream toward the town hall. The meeting would go exactly as planned. The same faces who'd looked away when his fences were cut would vote to rezone his land. Progress would march on, whether he agreed or not. His fingers found his phone again, remembering his son's terse response to his call for help. "I'm coming. Don't trust anyone until I get there." Looking at his burned fields in the gathering darkness, John Sr. wondered if he'd waited too long to make that call. The valley was changing. Frank was right about that, but so was John Jr. The boy who'd left the farm had become a man who understood violence in ways his father never could. As night fell over Thompson Creek Valley, John Sr. loaded his old shotgun and settled in for another long watch. His son was coming home, but the real question was, what kind of home would be left to defend? Somewhere in an undisclosed location, Captain John Mason Jr. stared at his phone, his father's words still echoing in his ears. "They're burning the wheat fields." 5 words that brought 15 years of military discipline crashing against a lifetime of complicated emotions. His team watched him carefully, recognizing the shift in their commander's demeanor. They'd seen that look before, right before missions that changed the course of conflicts. "Sir?" Lieutenant Richards asked quietly. "Problems at home?" Home. The word felt strange now. After 9 deployments and countless classified operations, home had become a tactical concept rather than a place. But the farm, that was different. "Take command," John Jr. ordered, already packing his gear. "I've got some personal business to handle." As his helicopter lifted off, memories surfaced, sharp as shrapnel. 10 years ago. "What do you mean you're not coming back?" His father's voice cracked over a satellite phone. "The harvest. There's a situation here, Dad. My team needs me." He couldn't explain more. Couldn't tell his father about the warlord threatening to massacre an entire village, or how his unit was the only thing standing in the way. "The farm needs you, son. This life you've chosen. It's not who you were. Meant to be?" The words had stung, especially because part of him wondered if his father was right. The Mason men had always been farmers, their battles fought against weather and markets, not foreign enemies. 5 years ago. "Your mother would be proud," his father said awkwardly, studying the silver star in its case. Neither mentioned that the ceremony had happened 6 months earlier, or that John Jr. had been too busy with another operation to tell his father about it. "The farm's struggling," his father continued. "Banks are getting aggressive. If you came—" "Oh, Dad, I can send money." "It's not about money, damn it. It's about legacy, about keeping what's ours, but what was truly theirs anymore." The farm belonged to a version of himself he barely recognized. The boy who'd helped with harvests and dreamed of nothing bigger than the next season's crop. 6 months ago. Their last conversation. "These corporations, these developers," his father had said, "they're like vultures circling. Then sell, get out while you can still get a good price." The silence that followed felt like a wall building between them. "You sound just like them now," his father had said finally. "All that military training, it's changed you. Made you hard. It made me realistic, Dad. The world's changing. Fighting it is what Masons do," his father cut him off. "We fight for what's ours, or at least we used to." Now, flying toward home, John Jr. reviewed the intelligence he'd gathered since his father's call. Property records, corporate filings, satellite images of the valley, all analyzed with the same precision he'd use for a military operation. The patterns were clear. This wasn't random vandalism or corporate pressure. This was a coordinated campaign. His sat phone buzzed, a message from one of his contacts. 2 names flagged in connection with the development consortium, Viktor Petrov and Hassan al-Rashid. Not the kind of men usually interested in small-town real estate. Something bigger was happening in Thompson Creek Valley. The helicopter pilot signaled they were 10 minutes out from the nearest civilian airfield. John Jr. checked his equipment one last time, nothing obviously military, but enough tools to handle whatever awaited him. His father had been right about one thing: fighting was in their blood. But the old man had never imagined the kind of fighting his son had learned to do. "Coming home, sir?" the pilot asked as they descended. "No," John Jr. replied, watching the familiar landscape emerge through the darkness. "Going to war." Thompson Creek Valley burned orange against the night sky as John Jr.'s rented truck crested the final hill toward home. New fires, at least 3 distinct blazes, illuminated the landscape like hell's own welcome party. His military training kicked in automatically, analyzing burn patterns, wind direction, points of origin. This wasn't random destruction. The fires had been set by someone who understood tactical positioning. He pulled over, killing the lights. Through his night vision monocular, he counted 4 figures moving between the burning fields. Professional movement patterns, coordinated spacing. These weren't local thugs. His radio scanner crackled. North fields lit. Move to phase 2. The voice carried an accent. Eastern European, possibly Serbian. Another voice responded in code that John Jr. recognized from his counter-terrorism operations. These were military contractors, not common criminals. A sheriff's vehicle approached. The fires, lights flashing. John Jr. watched as it stopped well short of the burning fields. No attempt to pursue the arsonists, no calls for backup. The local law enforcement wasn't just ineffective, they were complicit. His father's farmhouse stood dark and silent a mile ahead. John Jr. switched frequencies on his scanner, checking for surveillance teams. 2 more voices, these ones monitoring approach routes to the property. They were waiting for someone to respond to the fires, waiting to see if the old farmer would try to save his crops. Sheriff Peters to dispatch. The radio crackled. Just another unfortunate accident out at Mason's place. Probably electrical. Issues with his irrigation system. John Jr.'s jaw tightened. He'd known the sheriff since childhood, gone fishing with his son. Now Peters was helping burn his father's life work to the ground. The truck's electronics package, courtesy of his team's technical specialist, intercepted a burst of encrypted communications. Someone was coordinating these attacks from nearby, someone with military-grade equipment. This wasn't about real estate development anymore. The farm was being used as cover for something bigger. His phone vibrated, a message from his father. "Don't come to house, meeting at Miller's barn. Important." 3 problems with that message. First, his father never texted, claimed he couldn't. Work the damn tiny buttons. Second, Miller's barn had burned down 2 summers ago. Third, the message's metadata showed it routing through a server in Dubai. They were trying to lure him into an ambush, which meant they knew he was coming. Which meant someone in his father's trusted circle had warned them. John Jr. drove past the farm's main entrance, noting the fresh tire tracks. 3 vehicles had passed recently, heavy SUVs based on the tread depth. Professional operators always favored SUVs for their combination of power and cargo capacity. He parked behind the old Carson place, abandoned since the bank foreclosed last year. Perfect observation post for monitoring his father's farm. As he geared up, muscle memory took over, checking weapons, communication equipment, medical supplies. The weight of his ceramic plate carrier felt familiar under his civilian clothes. The scanner squawked again. Target vehicle spotted approaching from County Road, black Ford pickup. They were tracking him, but they were tracking the wrong vehicle. The rental he'd chosen as a decoy was now leading their surveillance team on a wild goose chase through back roads. Time to move. But first, he placed a call, not to his father's landline, which was certainly tapped, but to a frequency only one. Person would be monitoring. Yes? His father's voice cautious. The summer before I enlisted, John Jr. said quietly, you caught me sneaking out to meet Jenny Carson. What did you say? A pause, then a soft chuckle. Said if you were going to be stupid enough to climb down the barn roof, at least use the south side where the hay bales would break your fall. I'm coming in, Dad, but not through the front door. They're watching everything, son. Good. John Jr. checked his equipment one final time. Let them watch. By morning, they'll wish they'd never heard of Thompson Creek Valley. John Sr. didn't hear his son enter the farmhouse. One moment he was alone in the darkened kitchen. The next, a shadow detached itself from the wall. 15 years of military training had changed the boy who used to stomp through the house in muddy boots. Now he moved like a ghost, Place is bugged, John Jr. said quietly, setting a signal jammer on the kitchen table. Found 3 devices just in this room, professional grade. He pulled out a chair but didn't sit. You want to tell me what's really going on here, Dad? The old farmer studied his son in the dim light. Gone was the eager farm boy who'd enlisted, right after high school. The man before him carried himself with the coiled tension of a predator, eyes constantly scanning, analyzing. Started about 6 months ago, John Sr. began, right after our last conversation. Development company called Valley Future Properties started buying up farms, offered good money at first. When people refused, he gestured toward the burning fields visible through the window. John Jr. laid out a stack of papers. Property, records, corporate filings, surveillance photos. Valley Future Properties is a shell company. Traced it through 7 different holdings before hitting a wall in the Cayman Islands. But 2 names kept appearing in the periphery: Viktor Petrov and Hassan al-Rashid. The names meant nothing to John Sr., but he saw recognition flash in his son's eyes. Petrov runs weapons through Eastern Europe. Al-Rashid specializes in moving things across borders without questions. They don't invest in farmland unless... John Jr. paused, realization dawning. The grain silos. How many did Valley Future buy? 5 so far, building 3 more near the state line. Perfect cover for weapons storage, remote location, legitimate reason for heavy truck traffic. John Jr. pulled out a satellite image. And the new golf course they're planning? The dimensions match a private airfield. John Sr. felt his world shift. He'd thought this was about real estate, about progress swallowing tradition. But his son saw patterns he'd missed, a deeper danger behind the surface threats. Sheriffs involved, the old farmer added. Most of the town council, too. Money's too good, they say. Future's too bright to stay stuck in the past. They're stuck in something, all right. John Jr. checked his phone. 3 private security teams watching the farm right now. Serbian. Contractors, based on their radio chatter. These aren't thugs hired to scare farmers, Dad. These are professional mercenaries. A creaking floorboard made both men tense, but it was just the house settling. The same sound John Sr. had heard 1,000 times before suddenly felt different, dangerous. You should leave, his son said quietly. I can handle this. Get you set up somewhere safe until... Like hell, the old farmer's voice hardened. This land's been Mason ground for 3 generations, I know. John Jr. finally sat, meeting his father's eyes. But this isn't about the farm anymore. These people, they don't just burn crops and strong-arm farmers. They eliminate problems permanently. John Sr. pulled a stack of letters from his desk drawer. Threats, photographs of him working his fields, details about his daily routine. The last one had arrived yesterday. Pictures of John Jr. in his dress uniform, X's marked over his face. His son studied the photos with cold professionalism. No, I'm here. Good. Saves time hunting them down. He looked up at his father. But you need to understand something, Dad. What's coming? It won't be like anything you've seen before. I've fought my share of battles, son. Not like this. John Jr. stood, checking his equipment. These people think they're hunting a soldier who's come home to defend his father's farm. Instead, they've walked into a trap set by someone who specializes in dismantling criminal empires. By morning, they'll learn that some skills only get sharper with time. Outside, the fields continued to burn, but neither Mason watched the flames. They were too busy preparing for the war that would begin at dawn. Dawn found John Jr. on the roof of Carson's abandoned barn, using high-powered optics to map enemy positions. 3 surveillance teams maintained rotating watches on the farm, each positioned exactly where he would have put them. Professional work, which made them predictable to someone who wrote the book on rural surveillance tactics. His earpiece crackled, encrypted communications between the security teams. They were getting sloppy, tired after a long night watch. Their radio discipline was slipping. Movement at the farmhouse, one voice reported. Old man's checking his equipment, same morning routine. John Jr. smiled slightly. His father was playing his part perfectly, maintaining normal patterns while his son gathered intelligence. The security teams were so focused on the farm, they hadn't noticed they were the ones being watched. His phone vibrated, a text from Tommy Walker, his old high school friend who'd become a deputy sheriff. Coffee at Annie's diner? Like old times. 4 camera angles covered Annie's diner's parking lot. 2 men in tactical clothing, poorly concealed under civilian jackets, watched the entrance. They were good, but not good enough to spot the signs of counter-surveillance that John Jr. had arranged. Table by the window, he texted back, just like Baghdad. Tommy would understand the reference. Before becoming a deputy, he'd served 2 tours with Army intelligence. They'd crossed paths in Baghdad during an operation that never made the official records. John Jr. made his approach to the diner through delivery alleys and behind dumpsters, noting security camera positions and blind spots. The town had changed since his last visit. New cameras on every corner, all feeding back to the sheriff's office. But the old drainage tunnel that ran behind Annie's was still there, just like he remembered. Tommy was waiting at their usual table, coffee already ordered. His deputy's badge caught the morning light. Places watched, he said quietly as John Jr. sat. 4 teams, 2 obvious, 2 trying to be clever. John Jr. kept his voice low. Tell me about Valley Future Properties. Tommy's face tightened. Started buying up land 6 months ago. Offered 3 times market value at first. When people refused, he gestured vaguely. Accidents started happening. Equipment failures. Mysterious fires. Sheriffs involved? Up to his neck. Same with Judge Harrison and most of the council. Tommy leaned forward. But it's bigger than local corruption. Last week I spotted 3 cargo containers being unloaded at the new grain facility. No markings, no paperwork. Weapons. Can't prove it. But the night crew at the facility? All former military, Eastern European mostly. They're building something out there. Something that needs serious security. John Jr.'s tactical computer was recording the entire conversation through his phone, running voice stress analysis. Tommy was telling the truth, but holding something back. What aren't you telling me? Tommy glanced around before sliding a phone across the table. Recorded this at the last town council meeting. Private session, no public allowed. The video showed Judge Harrison addressing a room of serious-faced men. Our partners require absolute security, the judge was saying. The facility must be operational before the shipment arrives next week. Anyone who interferes... The threat was clear in his tone. There's more, Tommy added. 2 federal agents came asking questions last month. They disappeared. Sheriff claimed they moved on to another jurisdiction, but their rental car was found burned out in Carson Canyon. John Jr. processed this information against what he already knew about Petrov's operation. The weapons dealer was expanding, moving, from Eastern Europe into new territories. But this level of infrastructure suggested something bigger than arms trafficking. I need access to the sheriff's surveillance feeds, he said finally. Tommy nodded toward a waitress watching them too intently. Place is bugged, but yeah, I can help. Like old times? Like old times. John Jr. stood, leaving an encrypted flash. Drive under his coffee cup. Watch your back. They'll be checking everyone's loyalty soon. Outside, he noted the surveillance teams reporting his movement. Let them watch. Every bit of attention focused on him was attention drawn away from his real preparations. His father had texted an update, more visitors at the farm, more thinly veiled threats. But the old man had also managed to photograph their vehicle's license. Plates. Good. Every piece of information was another weapon in John Jr.'s arsenal. The war for Thompson Creek Valley wouldn't be won with bullets. It would be won with intelligence, with careful preparation, with the methodical dismantling of The enemy's operation. By the time they realized what was happening, it would be too late. Heavy vehicles were moving down Main Street, new equipment for the grain facility. John Jr. watched through his scope as men in tactical gear supervised the unloading. They thought they were building a fortress. Instead, they were constructing their own prison, one that would become their tomb if they didn't learn to leave honest farmers alone. They came at midnight, just as John Jr. predicted. 4 men approaching the farm's south fence line, using the burning fields as cover. Their movement patterns were professional, alternating pairs, maintaining proper intervals, checking blind spots. But they were following standard operating procedure too closely, making them predictable to someone who'd written those procedures. From his hidden position in the burned-out combine harvester, John Jr. watched through thermal optics. The team's loadout confirmed his suspicions. Serbian military equipment, modified for civilian use. These weren't common thugs. They were former Special Forces operators. Target approaching secondary perimeter, one of them reported in accented English. No movement from the farmhouse. Of course there wasn't. John Sr. was safely hidden in the storm cellar, monitoring the farm's newly installed security system. The empty farmhouse was bait, and they'd taken it. The team's leader signaled for a breach of the fence line. Standard procedure would have them split into 2 elements, one to enter the property, one to maintain overwatch. John Jr. had counted on this. The first trap triggered silently. Infrared sensors, hidden in the burned crops, registered the Overwatch team's position, feeding data to John Jr.'s tactical tablet. 2 men, exactly where he'd predicted they'd set up. Perimeter breached, the team leader whispered into his radio. Moving to Phase 1, John Jr. allowed himself a small smile. Their Phase 1 was about to meet his own carefully laid plans. The 2-man entry team approached the farmhouse using shadows for cover. They were good, checking windows and approaches professionally. But they weren't checking above. The first attacker went down silently, a tranquilizer dart, finding the gap between his body armor plates. His partner spun, weapon raised, but found only darkness. Before he could radio a warning, a second dart dropped him. Alpha Team report. The Overwatch element's leader demanded over the radio. Alpha Team status. John Jr. triggered his second trap. Pre-recorded sounds of struggle played through hidden speakers, drawing the Overwatch team exactly where he wanted them. They moved forward tactically, but their attention was focused on the farmhouse. They never saw the real threat coming from behind. The first man sensed something wrong a split second too late. John Jr. was already in motion, years of close quarters. Combat training taking over. A precise strike to the brainstem dropped the operative without a sound. His partner managed to turn, raising his weapon, but John Jr. was inside his guard before he could fire. The fight was brief, brutal, and nearly silent. When it ended, all 4 attackers lay unconscious, their weapons and equipment neatly stacked beside them. "Control, we've lost contact with entry team." A new voice crackled over their radio frequency. "Sending backup." John Jr. keyed his own radio. "Dad, you getting this?" "Third team moving in from the east," his father confirmed, watching through the security cameras. 6 men, heavy weapons. This team wasn't trying for stealth. They moved aggressively, tactically spaced, but clearly intent on overwhelming any resistance. Their confidence was their weakness. John Jr. triggered his final trap. The irrigation system he'd modified earlier sprang to life, spraying not water, but a mixture of fertilizer and diesel fuel. The team's night vision gear, calibrated for darkness, was suddenly overwhelmed by the chemical reaction. In their moment of confusion, John Jr. struck. Later, investigators would try to reconstruct what happened next. They'd find evidence of a precise, methodical attack. 6 highly trained operators, disabled in less than 30 seconds. No shots fired, no fatal injuries, but each man precisely incapacitated. Area secure, John Jr. reported, zip-tying the last unconscious attacker. How's our guest? Getting nervous, his father replied. Through the security feed, they could see the operations commander pacing in his SUV at the edge of the property. He's making calls. Good, let him report. Let them know exactly what happened to their best team. Dawn was still hours away, but already the night's message was clear. Thompson Creek Valley wasn't defenseless anymore. The predators had become prey, though they didn't realize it yet. Police bands going crazy, his father added. Sheriffs mobilizing everything, right on schedule. John Jr. collected weapons and intelligence materials from the fallen operators. Time for Phase 2. The war for Thompson Creek Valley had just drawn first blood. By sunrise, everyone would know that attacking the Mason farm had consequences. But only John Jr. knew that this was just the opening move in a much larger operation. The real war was just beginning. The sheriff's office was chaos by sunrise. John Jr. watched through high-powered optics as Sheriff Peters made frantic phone calls from his private office. The night's events had shaken the corrupt lawman's confidence. 12 professional operators, neutralized without firing a shot. It wasn't the kind of thing you could explain away as routine farmland security. Got something? Tommy's voice crackled through his encrypted radio. Judge Harrison just received 3 wire transfers, Swiss accounts routed through the Caymans. John Jr. had positioned his old friend in the dispatch office, monitoring communications and financial traffic. The deputy's computer skills were proving invaluable. Amounts? 2 million each. But here's the interesting part. The sending accounts match known fronts for Russian arms dealers. On his tactical laptop, John Jr. pulled up the files he'd assembled. The payments aligned perfectly with the scheduled completion dates for the new grain storage facilities, but the facilities' blueprints, obtained through Tommy's access, showed something else: reinforced foundations, military-grade security systems, climate-controlled storage areas. These weren't meant for grain. Your father's farm sits on the main access road, Tommy continued. Only direct route between the new facilities and the county highway. That's why they're pushing so hard. Not just the road. John Jr. studied satellite imagery. The elevation, Dad's property overlooks every approach. Perfect spot for monitoring incoming shipments or perfect position for surveillance. His phone buzzed, a secure message from one of his military contacts. The contents made his blood run cold. Satellite imagery showed similar facilities being constructed across 3 states, all controlled by Valley Future Properties, or its shell companies. They're building a network, he realized, using rural communities as cover for a smuggling infrastructure. Weapons, probably drugs too. Got more, Tommy reported. Just intercepted a call between the sheriff and someone named Victor. They're moving up the timeline. First major shipment arrives in 3 days. John Jr. checked his watch. The timing wasn't a coincidence. A major law enforcement conference would draw most of the state's police resources to the capital that weekend. The perfect cover for whatever they were planning. His father's voice cut in on the secure channel. Got visitors. Looks official. Through the farm's security cameras, John Jr. watched 2 black SUVs approach the farmhouse. The lead vehicle's license plate was federal government issue. But something felt wrong. The driver's postures, the vehicle's spacing. These weren't real federal agents. Stay inside, he ordered. I'm on my way. But before he could move, another vehicle caught his attention. Sarah Collins, who owned the local feed store, was pulling into the farm's drive. She'd been his high school girlfriend before the military. Changed his life's direction. What was she doing here? Let her in, Dad. I know what this is about. Sarah's father had been the town's previous sheriff before his suspicious suicide 6 months ago. John Jr. had been tracking financial transfers from that time period. The old sheriff had discovered something that got him killed. They threatened my family, Sarah said once inside the farmhouse. Her hands shook as she pulled documents from her purse. Dad found these before he died. Shipping manifests, construction plans, personnel files, everything about Valley Future's real operation. The fake federal agents were maintaining their perimeter, waiting for something. Probably orders from whoever really controlled this operation. "Tommy," John Jr. radioed, "run those vehicle plates through the real federal database." Already did. They're sophisticated forgeries, but the prefix codes are wrong for current FBI issues. John Jr. scanned Sarah's documents quickly, his tactical, mind assembling the pieces, construction sites across 3 states, shell companies leading back to international arms dealers. Local law enforcement systematically corrupted or eliminated. They're building more than a smuggling network, he concluded. This is an invasion, using legitimate businesses to establish military-grade facilities across the heartland, setting up infrastructure for something bigger. "A staging ground," his father said quietly, "like you used to describe from your deployments, preparing the battlefield before the real attack." Sarah's documents confirmed it. Valley Future wasn't just pushing out local farmers. They were systematically taking control of strategic positions across multiple states. The Thompson Creek operation was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. "We need to move," John Jr. decided. "Those fake agents won't wait much longer." "Tommy, initiate Protocol Echo. Dad, get Sarah to the fallback position. I'll handle our visitors." Dawn painted Thompson Creek Valley in shades of gold as John Jr. surveyed their defenses. The farm had become a fortress in the past 24 hours, though most of their preparations remained invisible to watching eyes. Just as he'd learned, in special forces, the best defenses are the ones the enemy never sees coming. "Security cameras are online," his father reported, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. "Though I still don't understand half these gadgets you've installed." John Jr. accepted the coffee, noting how his father's hands were scraped and dirty from helping install the defensive measures. The old man had worked through the night without complaint, following his son's instructions with the same determination. He'd once applied to teaching that same son about farming. "Show me again," John Sr. said, gesturing to the tactical tablet. "About the camera feeds and motion sensors." "Here." John Jr. pulled up the security grid. "We've divided the farm into sectors. Each sensor feeds data to this central system. Anyone approaches within half a mile will know about it." His father studied the display, jaw set with concentration. "Like checking fence lines," he said finally. "Breaking the property into manageable sections." "Exactly." John Jr. felt a sudden surge of pride. His father might not understand the technology, but he grasped the tactical concepts instinctively. "Now show me how you'll get to the fallback position if they breach the perimeter." The old farmer moved with surprising stealth through the pre-planned escape route, remembering each step John Jr. had taught him. He'd taken to tactical training like he took to everything, with stubborn determination and meticulous attention to detail. "Good," John Jr. said, when his father reached the hidden storm cellar. "But remember, if you hear the warning signal, don't wait, don't look back, just move," his father finished. "Like you said, son, though I'm not much for running from a fight. Sometimes surviving is the best way to fight back." John Jr. checked the ammunition stockpile they'd concealed. These people, they expect resistance. They don't expect survival. That's their weakness. Working together, they completed the morning's security checks. John Jr. had transformed everyday farm equipment into tactical advantages. The irrigation system could now deploy smoke screens. The grain augers concealed surveillance equipment. Even the old combine harvester had been repurposed as a hardened observation post. "Your mother would be proud," John Sr. said suddenly, as they finished calibrating the motion sensors. "Not of all this," he gestured at their preparations, "but of how you're protecting what's ours. She always said you had her sense of justice and my stubbornness." John Jr. paused, touched by the rare moment of emotion from his father. "I learned from the best," he said quietly. Everything I know about fighting for what matters, I learned here first." A warning tone from the tactical tablet interrupted the moment. "Vehicle approaching," John Jr. reported, switching to combat mode. "Western Access Road." They moved smoothly to their prepared positions, father and son working in practice coordination. Through his scope, John Jr. identified the vehicle. "Sheriff Peters's patrol car. Right on schedule," he muttered. "Dad, remember, play dumb, act scared, let him think his threats are working." His father checked the concealed body armor his son had insisted he wear. "Not my first time dealing with bullies, son." John Jr. watched through his scope as the sheriff approached the farmhouse. Peter's body language screamed tension. Hand never far from his weapon, eyes constantly scanning. The night's events had rattled him more than expected. "Morning, John," the sheriff called out as John Sr. met him on the porch. "Heard you had some trouble with trespassers last night." "Nothing serious," the old farmer replied, playing his role perfectly. "Probably just kids causing trouble." "Kids don't usually carry military-grade equipment," Peters said darkly, "or end up unconscious and zip-tied. You sure there isn't something you want to tell me?" From his hidden position, John Jr. recorded every word, every gesture. The sheriff's fear was evident to someone trained to read body language. The man was terrified of how his real bosses would react to last night's failure. "Last chance to sell, John," Peters said finally, "before things get worse." "Seems like they're already plenty worse, Tom." His father's voice carried just the right mix of resignation and fear. "Maybe I am getting too old for all this." The sheriff left with false assurances and thinly veiled threats. Once he was gone, John Sr. rejoined his son at the observation post. "He'll report that I'm close to breaking," the old farmer said, "that their plan is working." John Jr. nodded, pride swelling again at his father's tactical insight. "Perfect. Let them think they're winning. In 3 days, they'll learn the difference between breaking a man and making him dangerous." The feed store's back office smelled of leather and grain dust, just as John Jr. remembered from his teenage years. But today, something else hung in the air, the metallic scent of gun oil. Sarah hadn't noticed it when she led him in, but his training had taught him to recognize the smallest details. "Someone had recently cleaned a weapon in here. Dad's files are in the safe," Sarah said, moving toward the old cabinet. "Everything he discovered about Valley Future's operation." John Jr.'s instincts screamed danger. The office layout had changed. Subtly since his last visit, the desk had been moved, creating a clear line of fire from the storage room door. "Sarah," he said quietly, "when did Mark start working nights?" She froze, hand halfway to the safe. "How did you—" The storage room. Door burst open. Mark, Sarah's brother-in-law, emerged with a suppressed pistol aimed at John Jr.'s head. 2 more men followed, professionals based on their stance and weapon handling. "Sorry, John," Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. "They have my daughter." "Hands where we can see them," Mark ordered. "Our employers were very interested to learn you were coming here." John Jr. raised his hands slowly, mind racing through scenarios. 3 armed men, civilian hostage, confined space. He'd trained for worse. "Victor says hello," one of the professionals said in a thick Serbian accent. "He was most impressed with how you handled our night team." But now, the fluorescent light chose that moment to flicker, or rather, responded to the signal from John Jr.'s concealed remote. In that millisecond of darkness, he moved. The first attacker's weapon clattered away, wrist shattered by a precise strike. The second managed to fire, but John Jr. was already inside his guard, using the man's own momentum to slam him into Mark. Sarah screamed as gunfire erupted, but John Jr. had already disabled all 3 attackers. "Your daughter's safe," he told Sarah as he zip-tied the unconscious men. "She's with Tommy at the fallback location. We've been watching Mark for days." Relief and shame warred on Sarah's face. "John, You did what any mother would do." He keyed his radio. "Dad, situation handled, but we need to move fast. Our timeline just got accelerated." Through his tactical earpiece, Tommy's voice crackled with urgency. "Got movement at the grain facility. Multiple vehicles leaving in convoy. They're spooked. Track them, and send me everything from Mark's phone." Within minutes, the feed store's computer was revealing its secrets. Mark's emails confirmed their worst fears. Valley Future's operation went far beyond weapons smuggling. They were establishing a shadow infrastructure across the American heartland. "It's not just Thompson Creek," John Jr. explained to Sarah as they drove back to the farm. "They're building these facilities in strategic locations across multiple states, each one perfectly positioned for their real purpose, which is staging points for something bigger. Military-grade storage, communications networks, transportation. Hubs are all hidden behind legitimate businesses." He showed her the satellite images. "They're preparing for some kind of operation, something that needs serious infrastructure." His phone buzzed. A message from one of his military contacts. The contents made his jaw clench. 3 days ago, a shipment of Russian nerve agent went missing from a storage facility in Ukraine. Viktor Petrov's name came up in the investigation. Sarah's face paled. "The grain storage facilities, perfect distribution network. Nobody looks too closely at farming operations. Local law enforcement is bought off or eliminated. And if something goes wrong, the chemicals could be released, blamed, on agricultural accidents." Sarah finished. "That's why they needed my father gone. He was starting to piece it together." They drove in silence for a moment, the weight of the conspiracy settling over them. Thompson Creek Valley wasn't just fighting for its farms anymore. It was ground zero for preventing something far worse. John Jr.'s tactical computer beeped, analyzing data from Mark's phone. "Got a location. Victor's coming personally to oversee the first shipment. Wants to make sure there are no more complications." "When?" "Tomorrow night. They're moving up the schedule." He checked his weapons. "Which means we need to end this now, before they can get their operation fully in place." His father's voice came through the radio, tense but determined. "Farm's ready, son. All the preparations you planned, they're set." "Good, because tomorrow, Thompson Creek Valley becomes a kill box." John Jr.'s voice hardened. "They wanted to use our home as their staging ground. Instead, it's going to become their trap." In the distance, the grain facility's new towers rose against the sunset like modern fortresses. But John Jr. knew every fortress had its weaknesses, and he'd spent a lifetime learning how to exploit them. Sunset painted Thompson Creek Valley blood red as John Jr. watched enemy forces gathering through his thermal scope. The grain facility had become a staging area, with military-grade vehicles arriving under cover of darkness. He counted 12. Tactical teams already on site, with more coming. "They're not even trying to hide anymore," Tommy reported over the secure channel. "Just intercepted their communications. Victor's personal security detail arrived an hour ago. At least 30. Men, former Spetsnaz operators." John Jr. adjusted his observation post in the converted water tower. The enemy's preparation was professional, thorough, but predictable to someone who'd spent years studying their tactics. "Sheriffs mobilizing too," his father added from his monitoring station. "Got every deputy in the county heading to the grain facility, even called in state police support. Not for help," John Jr. noted grimly, "for containment. They'll block the highways, claim it's a chemical spill from a farming accident. Nobody gets in or out while they deal with us." The tactical computer flagged new movement, heavy trucks arriving at the facility's loading bays. Through his scope, John Jr. spotted the hazmat markings poorly concealed under fresh paint. "The nerve agent's already here," he realized. "They're not waiting for tomorrow. Victor's spooked enough to move up the timeline." His father's voice carried decades of farmer's wisdom. "Storm's coming. You can feel it in the air." He was right. The same instincts that had helped him predict weather patterns for 40 years were warning of a different kind of storm now. One that would transform Thompson Creek Valley into a battlefield. All preparations are set, John Jr. confirmed, switching observation positions. Remote charges in place, kill zones established, escape routes secured. But Dad, he paused, choosing his words carefully. You don't have to be here for this. Tommy can get you to the safe house in Miller's Crossing. The old farmer's reply was immediate. This is our land, son, our home. I'm not leaving. This won't be like the other night. These men, they're not just professionals. They're killers. What's coming? John Jr. checked his weapons automatically. It's going to be the kind of fighting I never wanted to bring home. Silence filled the radio channel for a moment. Then his father spoke, voice thick with emotion. Remember when you were 12? That tornado that nearly took the barn? You made me help you tie everything down, John Jr. said, memory surfacing, even though Mom wanted us in the storm cellar. Told her some things were worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. A pause. You didn't flinch then, watching that twister bear down on us, stood your ground right beside me. That was different, Dad. Nature's one thing. But these people are trying to take what's ours. Steel entered his father's voice. You think I spent 40 years working this land just to run when trouble comes? Everything I ever taught you about standing your ground, did you think those were just farming lessons? John Jr. found himself smiling despite the gravity of their situation. You always did have a way of making your point. Through his scope, he watched more forces assembling. Victor's men were professional, thorough. They'd turned the valley into a killing ground to achieve their objectives. Tommy, he radioed, initiate Protocol Echo. Shut down their communications. Just like we planned. Dad, start the irrigation system. The modified sprinklers hummed to life, dispersing a chemical mixture that would render thermal imaging useless. Small advantages, but in the coming fight, every edge would matter. One thing, son, his father said quietly, before it starts, I know I wasn't always understanding about your choices. The military being away so long. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do, because watching you these past few days, planning, preparing, protecting what matters, I realized something. You never really left the farm. You just found a different way to fight for what's important. John Jr. felt his throat tighten. All the years of distance, of trying to bridge the gap between his father's world and his own, seemed to dissolve in that moment. Incoming! Tommy's voice cut through the emotion. Multiple vehicles on all approach routes. They're starting their movement. Through his tactical display, John Jr. watched enemy forces taking position. They thought they were preparing to eliminate a troublesome farmer and his ex-military son. Instead, they were walking into a trap laid by 2 generations of Masons who'd learned different but equally effective ways of defending what mattered. You ready for this, Dad? Born ready, son. Let's show these boys what happens when they threaten a farmer's land. In the distance, thunder rolled across Thompson Creek Valley, but the real storm, the one that would transform this quiet farming community into a war zone, was just beginning. And at its center, a father and son prepared to make their stand, united at last in a fight for everything they held dear. The attack came from an impossible direction, through the underground drainage tunnel that only 3 people knew about. John Jr. was covering the eastern approach, when Tommy's voice crackled through his radio, but something was wrong with his tone. Movement at Sector 7, the deputy reported. Looks like the radio cut off. In the command center, John Sr. frowned at his monitors. Tommy's signal's gone. Could be interference from explosion rocked the farmhouse's foundation, not from the enemy's expected attack points, but from within their own defensive perimeter. Through the security feeds, John Jr. watched in horror as Tommy emerged from the drainage tunnel, leading a tactical team directly into their command center. Sorry, old friend, Tommy called out, weapon trained on John Sr. But Victor's offer was too good to refuse. Your son's not the only one who learned things in the military. John Jr. was already moving, but the distance was too great. He watched helplessly through his scope as the tactical team breached their inner defenses, using the exact routes and codes they'd trusted Tommy with. You really think Victor will keep his word? John Sr. faced his former friend calmly, though his hands shook slightly. Men like that don't leave loose ends. Maybe. Not, Tommy admitted, but 5 million buys a lot of distance. Now where's your son? Where's the evidence you've gathered? John Sr.'s hand inched toward the hidden shotgun under his desk. You know, Tommy, you're not the first man to betray this family. Won't be the last. His eyes flickered to the security screen showing his son's approach. But you might be the dumbest. The old farmer moved with surprising speed, shoving the desk toward Tommy's team. In the chaos, he managed to trigger the emergency protocols John Jr. had prepared, magnetic locks sealing the command center's doors, trapping everyone inside. "Dad, get clear!" John Jr. shouted through the radio, but it was too late. Tommy's reaction was pure trained reflex. 2 shots, center mass. John Sr. went down hard, but not before triggering the final failsafe. Gas billowed through the command center's ventilation system. John Jr. reached the outer door just as the gas took effect. Through the reinforced window, he watched Tommy and his team collapse, overcome by the non-lethal but potent chemical agent. But his father was down too, blood spreading across his chest. "Stay with me, Dad," he ordered, breaking through the security locks. The gas mask from his tactical gear allowed him to reach his father, apply pressure to the wounds. "Medical team is 3 minutes out." "Damn fool thing to do," his father coughed, face pale. "But couldn't let them take what's yours. The evidence." "Forget the evidence," John Jr. snapped, checking vital signs. "Just stay awake. Talk to me about the farm, about anything." "Southfield needs attention soon." Blood stained his father's lips. "Spring wheat should be coming up strong." Through his radio, John Jr. could hear the larger enemy force beginning their main assault. Victor's men were breaching the outer defenses exactly as planned. But none of it mattered now. The real damage had already been done by a man they'd trusted. With their lives. "You were right, son," his father whispered as the medical team finally arrived. "Can't trust the old ways anymore. World's changed." "No," John Jr. gripped his father's hand as the medics worked. "You were right. Some things are worth fighting for. Some trusts are still sacred." He watched them load his father into the emergency vehicle, then turned to where Tommy lay unconscious. The betrayal hurt, but it had also revealed something crucial. Victor's operation was even more sophisticated than they'd imagined, able to turn trusted allies through a combination of bribes and threats. But they'd made a critical mistake. They'd hurt his father, and in doing so, they'd transformed a tactical response into something far more personal. "Tommy gave them our defensive plans," he reported to Sarah over the secure channel. "Time for contingency Omega. The coming battle would be fought differently now, not just for the farm, not just to stop Victor's operation, but for a debt of blood that had to be paid. Thompson Creek Valley was about to learn the difference between a soldier following tactical protocols and a son avenging his father. The hospital's secure wing felt wrong to John Jr. Too exposed, too many entry points, but it was the best they could manage on short notice. His father's surgery had gone well, but the next 24 hours would be critical. "Perimeters secured," Sarah reported, returning from her patrol. "But you need to see this." She handed him a tablet with security footage from the grain facility. "Look who's with Victor." John Jr.'s blood ran cold. The grainy image showed a face he'd hoped never to see again. Colonel Anton Resnick, former Russian Special Forces commander. The man responsible for the massacre at Firebase Echo 3 years ago. It was never about weapons or nerve gas, he realized, pieces clicking into place. Those were just cover for something bigger. This is about revenge. Sarah looked confused. "You know him?" Firebase Echo, Afghanistan. My team uncovered his operation, selling military secrets, helping terrorist cells avoid detection. We shut him down hard. He lost everything, went off-grid. John Jr.'s jaw tightened. Now he's back, working with Victor. His tactical computer beeped. Analysis of Tommy's phone records complete. The communication patterns revealed a carefully orchestrated plan months in the making. Thompson Creek Valley wasn't randomly chosen. They'd selected it specifically because of him. They knew I'd come home if they threatened the farm, he said quietly. Resnick's using Victor's operation as cover to draw me out. The nerve agent, the weapons smuggling, it's all elaborate bait. But why, Sarah asked. Why go to all this trouble? Because at Firebase Echo, we didn't just stop his operation. John Jr. pulled up classified files on his secure laptop. We exposed his entire network. Russian generals, arms dealers, corrupt officials, all went down. Resnick lost millions, but more importantly, he lost face. Through the hospital window, he could see Victor's men taking positions around town. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. This was their end game. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The text contained only a video link. Against better judgment, he opened it. Resnick's scarred face filled the screen. Captain Mason, or should I say Farmer Mason now. His smile was cold as Siberian winter. How is your father? Such a tragedy, being betrayed by a trusted friend. You're a long way from Firebase Echo, Colonel. Ah, you remember. Good. I've spent 3 years planning this reunion. Victor thinks this is about weapons and chemicals. The local authorities believe it's about real estate. But you and I know the truth, don't we? John Jr.'s free hand clenched. This is about Echo, about what my team did to your operation. This is about honor. Resnick's facade cracked slightly. You didn't just destroy my business, you destroyed my reputation, made me a laughingstock in circles where reputation is everything. Through the window, John Jr. spotted more of Victor's men arriving. Not just mercenaries now, these moved with the precision of special operations forces. Resnick's personal kill team. You have 1 hour, Resnick continued. Surrender yourself, and the nerve agent remains secured. Refuse, and Thompson Creek Valley becomes a case study in agricultural disasters. Your choice, Captain. The video ended. Sarah watched him carefully. You're not actually considering no. John Jr. checked his weapons. But now we know what this is really about, and knowing your enemy's true motivation is the first step to defeating him. His father stirred in the hospital bed. Son? What's happening? Rest, Dad. I'm ending this. He turned to Sarah. Get him to the fallback position, then initiate Protocol Delta, just like we planned. John, his father called weakly, whatever you're thinking, remember what I taught you about cornered animals. They're at their most dangerous, John. Junior finished. I know, Dad. That's counting on. He moved toward the door, mind already gaming out scenarios. Resnick wanted personal revenge. Victor wanted his operation protected. Both had competing priorities, competing methods. That meant gaps in their coordination, weaknesses to exploit. This ends tonight, he told Sarah. One way or another. Behind him, monitors beeped steadily, measuring his father's heartbeat. Each pulse was a reminder of the price already paid and the debt still to be collected. Twilight settled over Thompson Creek Valley like a funeral shroud. From his position in the converted water tower, John Jr. counted enemy forces through his thermal scope. 60 men total, split into tactical teams of 4. They were setting up with military precision, establishing interlocking fields of fire. Victor's men are taking the north and east approaches, Sarah reported through the secure channel. Resnick's teams are covering the south and west. They're boxing us in. That's not their only purpose. John Jr. studied their deployment pattern. They're also blocking any potential reinforcement. When this goes bad, they want it contained. His tactical computer mapped enemy positions, overlaying them with the valley's terrain. Resnick was following standard Russian doctrine, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision, but he'd made one crucial mistake. "He's thinking like a Special Forces commander," John Jr. told Sarah, "expecting us to defend hardened positions, established bunkers. He doesn't understand what growing up on a farm teaches you about using terrain." The irrigation system hummed to life, spraying a specially formulated mixture into the air. Through his scope, John Jr. watched the enemy's thermal imaging equipment start to malfunction. First advantage, theirs. Sarah, activate the remote sensors, standard grid pattern. He checked his watch. 30 minutes until full dark. That's when they'll move. His father's voice came weakly through the radio from his hospital bed at the fallback position. "Southfield's irrigation ditch. Remember when we expanded it 3 summers ago? The one that floods every spring." John Jr. smiled grimly. "Already. You've factored it into the plan, Dad. Rest now." Through his tactical display, he watched Resnick's men establishing sniper positions. They were good, using natural cover effectively, but they didn't know about the underground drainage system that ran beneath their chosen spots, or the surprises hidden inside. "Multiple vehicles moving from the grain facility," Sarah reported. "Heavy weapons mounted. They're not even trying to hide anymore. They don't need to. Sheriff's got the highways blocked, claiming hazardous material spill." John Jr. checked his ammunition. No one gets in or out without their permission. His phone buzzed. A message from Resnick. 20 minutes, Captain. Time's running out." "He's trying to rush us," Sarah observed. "Make us sloppy." "No." John Jr.'s voice hardened. "He's enjoying this. Thinks he's got us trapped. Wants us to feel the pressure building." Through the gathering darkness, he could see lights coming on at the grain facility. They were preparing to move the nerve agent, or at least making a show of it. Another layer of pressure, another turn of the screw. "Sarah, initiate Protocol Omega, just like we planned." He switched channels. "Dad, you remember that tornado in '95, the one that split in 2? "Changed direction at the last minute," his father replied, understanding. "Caught everyone by surprise." "Exactly. History's about to repeat itself." His tactical display lit up as Sarah activated their preparations. Hundreds of hidden sensors came online, creating a real-time map of enemy movements. Underground corridors, carefully concealed over the past days, showed green, ready for use. "They're expecting us to fight conventionally," he explained. "Defend fixed positions. Return fire from prepared points." He checked his weapons one final time. "Instead, we're going to show them why you never corner a farmer on his own land." Movement caught his eye. Victor's personal vehicle arriving at the grain facility. The arms dealer was here to witness his triumph personally. Another mistake. 10 minutes, Sarah reported tensely. "Remember," John Jr. said, "when they hit us with everything they've got, when they think they've got us pinned down, that's when we spring the real trap." His father's voice came through again, stronger now. "Son, whatever happens, I'm proud of you, not just for coming back, but for understanding what I tried to teach you all those years. About farming, about knowing your land, about using what you have, about never giving up what's yours." A pause. "Your mother would be proud too." Through his scope, John Jr. watched the enemy make final preparations. They had the numbers, the weapons, the tactical advantage. What they didn't have was 3 generations of farming knowledge and a lifetime of military experience working against them. "Movement on all approaches." Sarah's voice was tight. "They're starting." "Good." John Jr. shouldered his rifle. "Let's show them the difference between invading a farm and attacking a fortress." In the distance, thunder rolled across Thompson Creek Valley, but the real storm, the one that would transform this quiet farming community into a war zone, was just beginning. And at its center, a son prepared to defend his father's legacy with every skill both of them had taught him. The first attack came with professional precision. 4 simultaneous breaches of the farm's outer perimeter, explosive charges detonated at strategic points designed to create entry corridors for assault teams. Through his thermal scope, John Jr. counted 20 men in the initial wave, moving with the coordinated grace of special operations veterans. Multiple teams converging on the farmhouse, Sarah reported from her observation post. They're using standard Russian assault patterns. Let them come, John Jr. replied calmly. Wait for my mark. The attackers moved with confidence, covering each other's advances with practiced efficiency. They'd done this countless times before, in other battles, against other enemies, but they'd never fought on ground this carefully prepared. First, a team reaching the barn. Sarah's voice was tense. Second team approaching the earth erupted beneath the lead assault team, not from explosives, those they'd been expecting, but from the irrigation system John Jr. had modified. Thousands of gallons of pressurized water mixed with farm chemicals created a toxic fog that overwhelmed their protective gear. Teams 3 and 4 changing direction, Sarah reported. They're moving to... I see it. John Jr. tracked their movement through his tactical display. They were adapting quickly, shifting to secondary routes. Exactly as planned, the night lit up with automatic weapons fire as Victor's men engaged what they thought were defensive positions. But they were shooting at shadows, automated targets designed to draw their attention while the real trap was sprung. Sarah, initiate sequence Alpha. The farm's heavy equipment positioned strategically days before roared to life. Combines and tractors, their engines modified for remote operation, began moving on predetermined paths. To the attackers' thermal imaging, they appeared as multiple hostile targets. They're splitting their forces, Sarah confirmed, just like you said they would. Through his scope, John Jr. watched Resnick's men falling into the pattern he'd predicted. They were professionals. When faced with multiple threats, they divided into smaller units to engage each one. Standard tactical doctrine that was about to become their undoing. Sequence Bravo, he ordered. Time to show them why you don't fight a farmer on his own land. The modified irrigation ditches, carefully flooded over the past days, had created a network of underwater channels throughout the property. Now, as the enemy teams split up to engage phantom targets, they found themselves isolated, cut off from support by water-filled trenches too deep to cross. Multiple teams pinned, Sarah reported with satisfaction. They're trying to fall back, but a massive explosion lit up the night. One of Victor's teams had discovered another surprise. The fuel tanks they'd been using for cover weren't filled with diesel, but with a specially prepared mixture that turned the air itself into a weapon. Chemical weapons detected, one of the team leaders shouted over their radio frequency. Fall back, fall. That's not chemical weapons, John Jr. said calmly into their hijacked command channel. That's fertilizer compound mixed with industrial. Cleaners. Basic farming supplies. Amazing what you can learn growing up on a farm. Resnick's voice cut through the chaos. Press the attack. They're just 2 people. We have overwhelming force. But his men were already discovering the flaw in that logic. Every piece of farm equipment had become a potential threat. Every irrigation ditch a tactical obstacle. The very land itself seemed to be fighting against them. Victor's personal team. Moving up, Sarah warned. They've got heavy weapons. Good. John Jr. checked his detonator. That means they're exactly where we want them. The arms dealer's elite unit moved with precision toward what they thought was the farm's command center. Their thermal imaging showed multiple heat signatures inside, obvious targets. But when they breached the building, they found only carefully placed heaters and a recording of radio chatter. "It's a trap!" Victor's commander screamed. Too late. The building's sprinkler system activated, but instead of water, it sprayed a mixture of agricultural chemicals. that rendered their expensive tactical gear useless. In the confusion, remote-controlled farm equipment emerged from concealed positions, herding them exactly where John Jr. wanted them. Sarah, final sequence. Light it up. The farm's massive grain augers, positioned days ago, rotated into attack positions. Their powerful motors, originally designed to move tons of grain, now served a different purpose, creating a kill zone of flying debris and disorienting noise. Resnick, John Jr. broadcast on all frequencies. I learned something important in Special Forces. You know what it was? Through his scope, he watched the Russian commander's frustration as his carefully planned assault fell apart. That the best weapon isn't always a gun. Sometimes it's knowledge, like knowing exactly how to turn farming equipment into tactical advantages, or knowing how to use your enemy's training against him. The night was still young, and this was just the first wave, but already Thompson Creek Valley was teaching Victor's men a costly lesson about underestimating farmers and the land they'd spent generations learning to use. The grain facility loomed against the pre-dawn sky like a fortress, its new towers stark against the stars. John Jr. observed through his thermal scope as Resnick's remaining forces consolidated their position. After the disaster at the farm, they'd fallen back to their stronghold, preparing for a final stand. They're moving the nerve agent, Sarah reported through the secure channel, loading it into reinforced containers. Looks like they're preparing to evacuate. No, John Jr. corrected, watching the pattern of movement. That's what they want. Us to think. Resnick's using it as bait, trying to draw us into a frontal assault. His tactical display showed enemy positions, 3 concentric rings of defense, professionally arranged. Snipers covered every approach, and motion sensors would detect any conventional attack. But Resnick had forgotten something crucial about Thompson Creek Valley. Sarah, initiate Protocol Delta. Dad, you reading these blueprints? Clear as day. Isan. His father's voice was stronger now, recovered enough to coordinate from the fallback position. Those new grain towers, built them right over the old railroad tunnel system. Tracks were abandoned in the 60s, but the tunnels are still there. Exactly. And what's the first rule of farming in this valley? Always know what's under your soil, his father replied with grim satisfaction. John Jr. switched channels. Victor, I know you're listening. One last chance to surrender. You're a businessman. You can see this operation is compromised. The arms dealer's accented voice crackled back. You think you've won because you bloodied our nose. Look around, Captain. We still have overwhelming force, defensive positions, and enough nerve agent to turn this valley into a graveyard. Maybe, but you're missing something important. And what's that? You're not fighting a soldier anymore. You're fighting a farmer, and we're about to show you the difference. The first explosion came from below, not the sharp crack of military demolitions, but the deep rumble of collapsing earth. The old railway tunnels, weakened by precise applications of agricultural chemicals, began to give way beneath the facilities. Foundations, multiple structure failures, Victor's men reported in panic. The towers are... Hold position, Resnick commanded. It's just one man. Maintain defensive formation. But John Jr. was already moving. As the facility's foundations shifted, he triggered his second surprise. The grain silos, which Resnick's men had been using as sniper positions, began to empty. Thousands of tons of grain poured through remote-controlled chutes, creating an avalanche that overwhelmed their carefully planned fields of fire. "West sector breached," someone shouted. "They're coming through the..." The report cut off as John Jr.'s first strike. Team hit their position, not soldiers. Restored farm equipment, reinforced and armored, controlled remotely. The defenders found their expensive tactical gear useless against machines designed to harvest in the harshest conditions. "Fall back to secondary positions," Resnick ordered. But his men discovered their retreat routes blocked by more agricultural Chaos. Irrigation systems turned into water cannons, fertilizer sprayers creating blinding clouds. Combine harvesters modified into mobile barriers. "Sarah, mark the nerve agent's location," John Jr. commanded, moving through the confusion like a ghost. His father's knowledge of the land combined with his military training made him virtually invisible to the panicked defenders. Northwest. "A corner," she reported. "Heavily guarded, Victor's there personally." Through his thermal scope, John Jr. spotted the arms dealer directing his remaining forces. But he also saw something else. Resnick moving to intercept him, leading his elite kill team. "Just like Fire Base Echo," the Russian's voice taunted over the radio. "You think you're so clever, using the terrain against us. But this time, I'm ready for you." "Are you?" John Jr. triggered his next sequence. The facility's grain processing equipment roared to life. Conveyor systems, augers, and sorting machines created a mechanical symphony of chaos. In the confined space, the noise and vibration overwhelmed the defenders' communications and tactical coordination. "You forgot the most important lesson from Echo," John Jr. broadcast. "Never fight on ground your enemy knows better than you." Resnick's team moved with professional precision, but they were fighting blind. Every corner held a new agricultural surprise. Clouds of grain dust that fouled their weapons, sudden floods of chemical runoff that made footing treacherous, machinery that seemed to move with deadly purpose. "The nerve agent!" Victor shouted. Suddenly, "It's been moved!" "No," John Jr. said quietly. "It hasn't." The containers they'd been guarding so carefully were empty. Decoys placed hours ago. The real nerve agent had already been secured by federal authorities, thanks to Sarah's evidence and Tommy's confession. "It's over, Victor," John Jr. announced. "Your operation is exposed. Federal response teams are already moving in. Resnick played you, used your resources to fund his revenge mission. And now you've lost everything." The arms dealer's response was predictable. He tried to run, but the facility's own systems had been turned against him. Every escape route led deeper into the maze of agricultural machinery that John Jr. now controlled. "You think this changes anything?" Resnick snarled, his kill team converging on John Jr.'s position. "I still have enough men to turn this valley into a graveyard." "Look again," John Jr. advised. The Russian commander checked his tactical display, finally realizing the truth. His men weren't hunting anymore. They were being hunted. Every movement drove them further into prepared kill zones. Every defensive position became a trap. "One question," John Jr. said as he moved into position for the final confrontation. "Did you really think I spent 15 years in special forces without learning the most important lesson?" "And what's that?" Resnick demanded. "That the deadliest weapon isn't your gun or your training or even your experience." John Jr.'s voice was cold. "It's understanding the ground you're fighting on, and you're not on a battlefield anymore, Colonel. You're on a farm." The last battle for Thompson Creek Valley unfolded like a harvest, methodical, precise, inevitable. Resnick's remaining forces found themselves corralled and contained by the very equipment they'd dismissed as irrelevant. Their tactical training, designed for urban warfare and military encounters, proved useless against agricultural ingenuity. In the end, it came down to two men, a farmer's son and a disgraced colonel, facing each other in the heart of the grain facility. Their final confrontation wasn't decided by weapons or tactics, but by the simple truth John Jr. had learned from his father. You never truly know a piece of land until you've worked it with your own hands. Dawn broke over Thompson Creek Valley as federal authorities secured the facility. They found Victor's men contained and subdued, their expensive tactical gear covered in grain dust and agricultural chemicals. Resnick himself was zip-tied with baling wire, his elite kill team neutralized by equipment designed for bringing in the harvest. "You know what your real mistake was?" John Jr. asked the defeated Russian. "You thought farming was simple, thought it was beneath your tactical expertise, but there's nothing simple about working the land. Every season is a battle, every harvest a campaign, and we've been fighting those battles a lot longer than you've been fighting yours." The sun rose over fields that would need replanting, but the soil remained rich and strong. Thompson Creek Valley had survived, not just because of military training or tactical skill, but because a son had finally understood what his father had been teaching him all along. Sometimes the best way to fight isn't with weapons, but with wisdom passed down through generations. Sometimes the strongest fortress isn't built with walls, but with knowledge of the land itself. And sometimes the most important victories are won not by soldiers, but by farmers who remember what they're really fighting for. 2 months after the battle, wheat swayed in the morning breeze across the restored fields of the Mason farm. John Jr. walked the perimeter with his father, both men pausing occasionally to check the growing crops. The bullet wounds in John Sr.'s chest were healing well, though he still moved carefully. "South fields coming in strong," the old farmer noted with satisfaction. "That new irrigation system you designed is making a difference." John Jr. nodded, remembering how they'd rebuilt the farm's infrastructure after the fight. The same tactical thinking that had helped them defeat Resnick now served to make the land more productive than ever. "Federal authorities finished their investigation," he reported. "Victor's network is dismantled. Resnick's facing multiple life sentences. The nerve agent stockpile they found in his other facilities. It could have changed the face of warfare." His father studied the horizon thoughtfully. "Saved more than just the farm, didn't we?" "We saved the valley. But more importantly," John Jr. paused, choosing his words carefully, "I finally understood what you were trying to teach me all those years." Sarah's truck approached, kicking up dust along the access road. As the new sheriff of Thompson Creek Valley, she'd been instrumental in helping rebuild the community's trust after the corruption was exposed. "Town council approved the new farming cooperative," she called out, joining them. "Small farms working together, sharing resources, protecting each other. Your idea is already spreading to other communities." John Sr. smiled. "Sometimes the best defense isn't walls or weapons, it's neighbors watching out for neighbors." The valley was changing, but not in the way Victor and his forces had intended. Instead of becoming a base for criminal operations, it had grown stronger. The lessons learned during those desperate days had taught the community the true value of what they had. "Got word from my old unit," John Jr. said. "They're implementing some of our defensive strategies in agricultural regions overseas, turning farming knowledge into tactical advantages." His father's weathered hand touched a growing wheat stalk. "Your mother used to say every harvest tells a story. This one's got quite a tale to tell." Together, they watched the sun climb higher over Thompson Creek Valley. The scars of battle were fading, covered by new growth and fresh purpose. But the lessons remained, about the strength found in working the land, about the wisdom passed from father to son, about the different ways a man could serve what he believed in. "Time for morning chores," John Sr. said finally. "These fields won't tend themselves." John Jr. shouldered his work bag, ready to begin another day of rebuilding and growth. His military career had taught him how to fight, but his father had shown him what was worth fighting for. Here, in the rhythm of farming life, he'd found a different kind of service, protecting not just the land, but the values it represented. Though wheat swayed in the morning breeze, telling its story to anyone who knew how to listen, it was a story of battles won not just with tactical skill, but with generations of farming wisdom. A story of a valley that had faced its darkest hour and emerged stronger. A story of a father and son who had finally learned to speak the same language, even if they'd taken different paths to get there.